Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. I've given you my thoughts on the top open guys at this year's Mr. Olympia. Now it's time to do the same in Classic. This year's top call out in the Classic Physique division consisted of 3 men. The top 3 obviously consisted of Chris Bumstead. When hasn't that happened? I'll tell you actually. It happened every single year of the Classic Physique Olympia except 2016, where Chris didn't compete. But this year he was joined by perennial top 3 guy Urs Galasinski. He's been top 3 for 3 years now. But we had a newcomer arise to the top 3. This guy pushed everyone else out of the top 2, from Urs to Wesley to Ramon. Mike Sommerfeld actually showed up, shocked everyone, and then took second. Now, since 2020, Chris has only won with perfect scores. However, Mike was able to narrow the gap just slightly, if you look at the scorecard. And it may not seem like much, but that is a big deal. So what I want to do today is take a look at your top 3 guys and give you my analysis of the 2024 Classic Physique Olympia top call out. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into today's video. If you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. The front double is the ultimate litmus test for this division. This is going to show just how classic you are. And we have 2 great poses, 2 classic poses at that, and then Urs. I've said this for a while now about Urs, but I just don't get why he places so high. And some of that has to do with what we see here. I just don't like his flow, and for the longest time I couldn't really figure out why, but I do think it's a combo of his odd ribcage shape, narrow clavicles, but also at the same time a lot of lat width. So Urs ends up looking pretty wide, but at the top across the shoulders actually pretty narrow. I prefer literally everyone else in the top 5 compared to this pose. Breon is much better to me than this. Of course, Mike and Chris are, and Ramon is better, but he was too busy sweating. Anyway, Urs still has good elements like the legs and the waist, and he brought his arms up, but they're still the weakest up here and pretty weak proportionally. But it's just the flow. He looks weird, and that means he has a direct shot to third. And second, I do have Mike, giving Chris a good run for his money though. And honestly, I imagine some people do prefer Mike to Chris, but not me. It's once again coming back to that arbitrary word flow. They both have good flows to their physiques, but I like Chris's brand of aesthetics more and the quality. This is why Mike isn't winning the quads by much, if at all. The cuts to Chris's legs are deeper and he has that more mature look, but Mike's quads are massive. Then in the midsection, Mike has that crazy V-taper, one of the most exaggerated ones I've seen, but Chris has that vacuum. It's Frank Zane level. And his abs are more defined too while he hits it, so you get the best of both worlds. Once again, Mike looks a little smooth next to Chris in the torso. In the arms, this is a toss-up. I know guys hate Chris's arms, but they peak just a little bit better than Mike's, and they're harder and more separated. However, Mike can really win on the mass and shape of his biceps alone. So overall, body part to body part, they're close, but in Classic, it's usually not just about that. It's usually more about the flow, the quality, the balance, and how the physique all works together. Chris works for me more. I do prefer his body parts to Mike, but I definitely prefer his more mature, higher quality physique and the proportions on him. So he takes first in this first shot. Next, we have the side chest, and this is definitely where it gets really interesting. Everyone brings a fantastic pose. So I really had to nitpick, and when I did decide to have Urs in third yet again. Urs is actually good for how young he is in this shot. He brings a ton of thickness, but both guys have more detailed side legs, thicker arms, and thicker pecs. Urs is great, but in this lineup, he's third. Now, between Chris and Mike, this is actually pretty close. And consider that Chris has one of the best side chests ever. It's like a modern Arnold. He's not Ronnie Coleman or Big Ramy, but he's basically still perfect in the shot. He's just a bigger guy, and that's actually filled out, so that allows him to beat Mike. Mike has a great side leg, probably a bit bigger than Chris's, but Chris is a little more detail, so you can go back and forth there. But me personally, I usually err on the side of detail, so I would go with Chris. Then in the arm and delt, both guys are good, but Chris is bigger, so he should probably get a win overall. But Mike has a very capped off delt with a better bicep insertion, so I actually prefer him in this area. And finally in the pecs, Mike is great. He has a really thick set of pecs, great detail, but Chris just has a bigger chest. Not just because he's taller, but he has better pec insertions. They take up more space proportionally on his frame, like Arnold's pecs. And he has a nice square look, and that far pec has the picture perfect striations. And then from an overall perspective, Mike is compact and looks like a mini bodybuilder, which I don't think is a bad thing in this pose, even in Classic. But Chris is pulling a vacuum, and he stands really upright, and he doesn't look small or lanky. Like I said, he's bringing Arnold's side chest into a modern era. To me, this is among the best side chest poses of all time. It can't really stand next to open greats, but in Classic, it's perfect. He has that old school flair with a fantastic size and modern conditioning. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going with Mike. Honestly, you can pick him and I'd understand it, but Chris is once again that perfect combo and that middle ground between open and Classic. Now we have the rear double. Chris was able to bring his back up tremendously from where he started, but this was always a vulnerable pose for him. And I'd wager this is where Mike had a couple of those jabs in. It's still close, but I'm kind of leaning towards giving Mike the narrow win. Chris's back is big, he's filled out, but in terms of thickness, he does lack. And Mike's back is pretty wide too for having a smaller frame. And he has the thicker back. It doesn't look as flimsy as Chris's. But when we go to the lower body, this is the main reason I think it could also go to Chris. The back was not a big win for Mike, and the lower body is definitely not a win at all. Chris has the more more well-rounded lower body. He has the better quad sweep, thicker hamstrings, and most importantly, better adductors. Mike has a Wesley Vissers problem almost. The glutes and hams are shredded, but he has a big gap between his legs. He has the least filled in and filled out legs here. Urs and Chris have twice the thickness of Mike. The glutes and hams are peeled though, so maybe you think that's enough for the back to do the rest. Still though, I'm on the fence. Chris has the more balanced pose overall, and the back is not far behind. This is a very big internal debate for me, so we're actually going to go ahead and get a closer look. But first, we're dropping Urs off here. No, I will not elaborate. Anyway, here's a look at the finals. You may have noticed in this comparison, I'm only looking at prejudging. Well, that's because the IFBB basically just looks at finals. They don't even score it. It's not even on the scorecard. But since I was going to provide a closer look using close-up images, why not take it from the finals? In addition to these close-up photos, I watched the stream and these guys' routines just so I can make a more accurate call. And after all of this, I actually have Chris narrowly taking the pose. I didn't have any new revelations really. The two frames of thought were still present in my mind. Do I want a slightly better back or a better pose top to bottom? Upon looking at all the other sources, I realized that the gap between Mike and Chris just wasn't big enough for Mike to win on just his back. For example, if we take a look at Chris's back here, it's not as detailed, but it's big. It's hard to compete with a guy that's 6'2" or whatever when you're 5'7", unless your details are out of this world. And then once again, what really trips me up on Mike is the lower body. The development difference down here is just way too vast. Chris's legs are twice as thick. I still think this is very, very close, and I completely understand giving this to Mike because his back is better. But to me, I'm going to prefer a balanced pose unless the back is several times better. And is Mike's back that much better than Chris's back? Not enough for me. I'll tell you what Mike does absolutely beat Chris in though. Ab development. Chris's actual crunched abs pose is pretty mediocre. Great V taper and quads, but the abs were never that chunky or separated. Mike has the best quads up here, even better than Urs's. And if you don't believe me now, just wait until you see them in the video. They're big, they're flexed, they're separated, they're feathered. They have everything. And Mike's midsection development is the best here as well. He doesn't have the best taper, I'd say. He's just a little worse than Chris, but Urs looks weird with the overall huge lats and really not that small of a waist for this division. So Mike has the second best lines here, and he has the most shredded obliques, the chunkiest abs, and the most separated abs. Urs has some great blockiness to the abs as well and great quads, so honestly he probably still beats Chris here, but it's that weird shape, I just can't get over it. But now let's get to the vacuum since this is classic. Now Urs didn't hit a vacuum and for good reason. His ribcage makes his vacuum look really weird, so I think not hitting it was actually the right choice, but he has to rely on just his abs pose here. Now in a default second, I'd put Mike. Fantastic quads, deep vacuum, not the most rounded ribcage, but this is still a great looking vacuum. But Chris Bumstead is that guy, the best one to do this outside of Frank Zane. The ribcage is wide and has that nice upside down U shape. The lats are also wide, the waist is small, and the quads are thick and cut. So he's first in the vacuum, probably third in the actual ab shot, and Mike was first in the abs and second in the vacuum. This is another dilemma. Do you want a better vacuum or a better flexed abs? I really don't think there's a wrong choice since this is classic. I have to be honest though, between both variations, I think Mike has the better average. Basically, Mike's vacuum is a bit stronger than Chris's flexed ab shot. But then again, Chris's vacuum is so iconic that it may actually be better than Mike's flexed abs and thighs. But they're both 10 out of 10 shots. They're different things though. Overall, I'm still going with Mike. He has the way better abs than Chris and doesn't slack in the vacuum one bit. I get it, Chris's vacuum probably wins in the pose for most of you. As I said, it's iconic. And if we were just judging on the vacuum pose, this would be Chris's pose easily. But I get more from Mike. I get a great vacuum and some of the best ab development in the entire show. So I actually have Mike beating Chris in the overall abs and thigh shot. And that does leave Urs in third. He doesn't have a vacuum, so I get less from him than both Chris and Mike. And I told you guys his ab shot just rubs me the wrong way. It's pretty good objectively, but it's just not in my taste. Alright, now it's time for the favorite classic pose, and if you guys have seen my past classic physique comparisons, I basically just throw my hands up here. I like to be as objective as I can, and that is impossible to do here. I would say I found the best way to be the most objective I can though. I'm not going to keep ranking these guys in this shot. I'm done doing that in my classic comparisons. That's arbitrary and dumb. Instead, I'm grading on participation. Basically, you either get a point here or nothing. But for multi-weight comparisons, it's a little different. I have to flip it, so if you do well in the shot, you actually get 0 points, and if you don't do well, then you get a point. This is because in a multi-weight comparison, a lower score is better. So either it's 0 points for decent posing or better, or 1 point if you suck. And this is judged on overall posing. The judges barely consider it, but I will because this is classic. It's ridiculous how posing isn't judged. So I'll be looking at how these guys hit the mandatories, including the favorite classic pose, and I'll be watching the routines and transitions to make my decision. And I have to be honest, the bar is set incredibly low, even in classic. No one can pose a lot of the time, so this will just be a nothing burger because everyone is going to get a point more than likely. So maybe I will start ranking these guys, but on their own individual merits. What I will do is give them 1 to 3 points based on how good their posing is, but that's not very objective either. Let me know what you guys think. For now, we'll just stick to the lowest common denominator, grading on participation. And as I said, the bar was low, but all 3 of these guys do more than enough to earn their point here. Urs is considered the best poser in Classic now, and Mike is very underrated as well, but now that he's in the spotlight, he'll hopefully get some more attention. Chris is actually the weakest poser here, but still a very decent one. All the mandatories are great. He has a great arsenal of poses that he looks good in and executes correctly, but he wings it in the posing routines, and that exposes some sloppy transitions. But in this era, as long as you have good poses, you might as well be Ed Corney. So to round this comparison out, they're either decent or the actual best poser in the division, so they're all going to receive 0 points in the favorite Classic pose. And now it's time to reveal the final scorecard. This was actually surprisingly close between Mike and Chris. Not for Urs though, he was not a factor here at all. He didn't win a single pose, actually he placed last in all of them out of these 3 guys, and in most shots, guys that were actually in the second call out probably should have beaten him. I'm an Urs hater, I'll put that out there, but to me his shape is not that good and he's underdone in the back. He's doing the bodybuilding side of things poorly as far as muscularity and completeness are concerned, and he doesn't do the Classic thing the best either. So honestly, I think this should have been a 2-man call out from the beginning. So between Mike and Chris, there was just a 2-point difference, and in a 3-way comparison with just 4 poses really scored, that's actually extremely close. If I flipped 1 pose, it would have been a tie game. And I definitely could have. In my first draft of the scorecard before I started scripting, I actually had Mike winning the rear double, and that pose could definitely still go to him. And at that point, it's a tie, and that's a situation I've never seen Chris in. So honestly, I do think Mike has put up the best fight against Chris. From Terrence to Ramon, Mike was able to push Chris the most. That's how the judges saw it, and that's how I see it. Remember, this is actually the first time someone has taken points away from Chris in years. Chris has won with a perfect score since 2020, and it was a lot closer than Chris is used to. But even in that tie scenario I could have had it in, I would still give this to Chris every time. It's a structure thing. The front double is always going to Chris, the vacuum is insane, the structure settled the side chest, and it pulls weight in the Classic poses too. Chris is just undeniable in that department. Mike is very good, especially looking like a bodybuilder, and that helps in the side chest and the rear double, but in Classic, I want shape, and quite literally no one matches the standard of Classic, and the official standard is Chris. From the huge flaring lats to the tight waist and the height and the wingspan, there is no replicating this. But it's not just the structure, he has good mass and completeness too. Mike could get a win in the back, but never a knockout, and the side chest is another good litmus test for those bodybuilding aspects, which Chris aces, and he won the pose. I'm sorry, I know it's not the best explanation, but this is what I got. Mike is not Chris, Ramon wasn't Chris, Terrence wasn't Chris, and Brian wasn't either. I'm not even trying to glaze, I'm just trying to say, how could you ever beat the standard when you're competing against the standard? By the end of his career, Chris really didn't have any weaknesses. The arms were fine, the back was brought up to a decent enough point, so even if he did get beat there, which he did fairly often, it wasn't enough to sink the whole ship. He had vulnerabilities, but not weaknesses. Chris had the muscle, he had the completeness and the conditioning, but he had the best shape, the shape that quite literally changed the bodybuilding world. Mike put up a great fight, the best anyone else did, and the best anyone else was going to do. It probably was never getting closer than this. If Chris kept showing up like this, it was going to be a wrap every year. The reason Mike lost is the same reason that everyone else did. They're not Chris. They're not that perfect marriage of mass, condition, and that 1 in a million Classic structure. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. What did you guys think of Chris's last Olympia, and do you think Mike was actually close? And if any of you had Mike winning, let me know why down in the comments. And if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you want to support the channel even further and get your hands on some high quality supplements, then look no further than Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, be sure to use my code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Get Alexia.